The woman who rode into Genoa, Nevada on that scorching August afternoon in 1872 brought more than dust and determination with her. She brought 3 years of whispered rumors, 5 unexplained deaths, and a reputation darker than the storm clouds gathering over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Florence Katherine came to town with her belongings strapped to a tired mare, and her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the way conversations died as she passed. Harrison Gregory was checking the fence line on his cattle ranch when he first saw her through his spyglass, a distant figure moving slowly along the road that cut through his property. He lowered the brass instrument and wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting against the late afternoon sun. Visitors were rare enough in these parts, but something about the way this rider moved, shoulders squared despite obvious exhaustion, caught his attention in a way he could not quite explain. By the time Florence reached the edge of town, half the population had already gathered on the wooden sidewalks, watching her approach with eyes full of suspicion and mouths tight with judgment. She dismounted in front of the general store, her legs nearly buckling after hours in the saddle. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around a face that would have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. "We do not need your kind here," came a voice from the gathered crowd. Florence did not turn to see who had spoken. She had heard similar words in 3 towns before this one. The store owner, a portly man named Samuel, stood in his doorway with his arms crossed. "The lady at the boarding house will not rent to you. I suggest you keep riding." Florence's hands trembled as she reached for her mare's reins. She had $23 left to her name, no family within 500 miles, and nowhere left to run. The curse that supposedly followed her had taken everything else. "I need supplies," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I can pay." "Your money is no good here," Samuel replied. "We heard about what happened in Virginia City, and Carson City before that." "I had nothing to do with those deaths," Florence said, finally turning to face the crowd. "I am just trying to survive." An older woman spat on the ground. "3 husbands dead. 5 people who helped you dead. That is not coincidence. That is a curse, and we will not have it brought down on our town." Florence felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction. Her 3 marriages had been brief, desperate attempts at security, each ending in tragedy that had nothing to do with her. The first husband had died in a mining accident, the second from pneumonia. The third had been thrown from a horse. But people needed someone to blame for the random cruelty of life, and a woman alone made an easy target. She was about to mount her horse when a wagon rolled up beside her, driven by a man in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of new grass. Harrison Gregory set the brake and climbed down, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "That is enough," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "This woman has done nothing to any of you." Samuel shook his head. "Stay out of this, Harrison. We are protecting the town." "From what?" "A tired woman who needs a meal and a place to rest." Harrison turned to Florence, and she was struck by the kindness in his expression. "My ranch is 2 miles north. I have a guest cabin that is standing empty. You are welcome to stay there until you figure out your next move." Florence stared at him, searching for the trick, the ulterior motive. "You do not know me." "I know enough," Harrison said. He looked back at the crowd, his jaw set. "Anybody who has a problem with my hospitality can take it up with me directly." No one spoke. Harrison Gregory owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, employed half the able-bodied men in Genoa, and had a reputation for fairness that made even his critics think twice before crossing him. He was also the son of one of the original settlers, which gave him a status in the community that was nearly untouchable. Florence made a decision born of desperation, and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you. I accept." Harrison helped her into the wagon, then tied her mare to the back. As they rolled out of town, Florence could feel dozens of eyes boring into her back. She sat rigidly on the bench seat, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever miracle had just occurred. "They will make your life difficult for helping me," she said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes. Harrison kept his eyes on the road. "Let them try. You do not understand. Everywhere I go, something terrible happens. I do not know why. I do not know how to stop it. But the pattern is undeniable. Life is terrible sometimes," Harrison said. "That does not make it your fault." They turned onto a narrow road that led through grassland dotted with cattle. In the distance, Florence could see a sprawling ranch house and several outbuildings, all well-maintained and prosperous-looking. It was the kind of place she had dreamed about as a girl, before 3 failed marriages and a string of tragedies had taught her that dreams were dangerous things. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died when I was 12. People said it was because my father had married below his station, that God was punishing him for loving an immigrant woman. They said our family was cursed. They said a lot of things." He glanced at her briefly. "I know what it is like to be blamed for circumstances beyond your control." Florence felt something crack open inside her chest, a tiny fissure in the wall she had built around her heart. "I am sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago." Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small cabin set apart from the main house. "This was built for my foreman, but he decided to go back east last spring. It is not fancy, but it is clean and dry." The cabin was more than Florence had dared hope for. It had glass windows, a stone fireplace, and a real bed with a straw mattress. Harrison helped her carry in her few belongings, then showed her where the well was and promised to bring supplies from the main house. "I can work," Florence said quickly. "I am good with animals. I can cook and clean. I will not take charity." Harrison smiled for the first time, and Florence was startled by how it transformed his face. "We can discuss work arrangements tomorrow. Tonight, just rest." He left her alone as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Florence sat on the cabin's small porch, watching darkness creep across the valley. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope, small and fragile as a candle flame, but real nonetheless. She did not see Harrison watching from the window of the main house, his own thoughts in turmoil. He had acted on instinct when he saw her being driven from town, responding to some pull he did not fully understand. There had been something in her eyes, a strength wrapped in vulnerability that called to something deep inside him. He told himself he was simply being charitable, but even as he thought it, he knew it was not the whole truth. The next morning, Florence woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee. She found a basket on her porch containing bread, butter, eggs, and a pot of coffee still warm from the stove. A note in strong, clear handwriting read, "Breakfast. Come to the main house when you are ready." She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Real food, after weeks of stretching her supplies to the breaking point, tasted like heaven. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her least worn dress, and braided her hair. Then she walked across the yard to the main house, her heart hammering with nerves. Harrison was in the kitchen, washing dishes at a large sink. The house was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor, with curtains in the windows and rugs on the floors. Florence could see touches that spoke of a woman's influence, though Harrison had mentioned living alone. My housekeeper comes 3 times a week, he explained, following her gaze. Mrs. Chen. She is the only person who can keep me from living like a complete savage. You do not seem like a savage to me, Florence said. Harrison dried his hands on a towel. Give it time. He gestured to the kitchen table. Sit. We should talk about what happens next. Florence sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. I meant what I said about working. I will not be a burden. I believe you, Harrison said. He poured them both coffee and sat across from her. I could use help with the horses. My stable hand broke his leg last month and I have been doing double duty ever since. Can you handle that kind of work? Yes, Florence said immediately. She had grown up around horses, had learned to ride before she could raid. I can do anything you need. They spent the morning working together in the stables, and Harrison was impressed by how naturally Florence moved among the animals. She had a gentle way about her, speaking softly and moving slowly, never startling or forcing. The horses responded to her with trust, even the temperamental stallion that usually gave everyone trouble. You have a gift, Harrison said, watching her brush down a mare with long, soothing strokes. Florence shrugged. Animals do not judge. They do not care about rumors or curses. They just care about how you treat them. People could learn from that, Harrison said. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following days. Florence worked hard, rising before dawn to help with feeding and grooming, mucking out stalls and exercising the horses. Harrison paid her fairly, refusing to dock her wages for the cabin rental despite her protests. In the evenings, they often found themselves on the porch of the main house, drinking coffee and talking as the stars emerged overhead. Florence learned that Harrison had inherited the ranch at 20, after his father died of a heart attack. He had built it from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in Nevada through hard work and smart management. He loved the land with a passion that was evident in every word he spoke about it. Harrison learned that Florence had been orphaned at 15 and married her first husband at 17, desperate for security. Each subsequent marriage had been driven by the same need, the same fear of being alone and vulnerable in a harsh world. She spoke of her losses with a matter-of-fact tone that broke his heart, as if she had long ago accepted that happiness was not meant for her. You deserve better than that, he said one evening, the words coming out more forcefully than he intended. Florence looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? You deserve to be wanted for yourself, not just as a solution to a problem. You deserve to be loved, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. I think we both know that is not likely to happen. I am cursed, remember? You are not cursed, Harrison said firmly. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. The contact sent electricity up his arm, and he saw her eyes widen in response. You are just unlucky. There is a difference. Florence looked down at their joined hands, her throat tight with emotion. No one had touched her with such simple kindness in longer than she could remember. You should be careful. Bad things happen to people who get too close to me. I will take my chances, Harrison said. That night, lying in her bed in the cabin, Florence stared at the ceiling and tried to ignore the way her heart was opening despite all her efforts to keep it closed. Harrison Gregory was dangerous, not because he meant her harm, but because he made her want things she had long ago given up hoping for. He made her want a future. In the main house, Harrison was having similar thoughts. He had not expected to feel this way about Florence, had not planned on the way her smile made his chest ache, or the way her laughter made him want to do anything to hear it again. He had told himself he was just being charitable, but 3 weeks into her stay, he could no longer deny the truth. He was falling in love with her. The town of Genoa, meanwhile, watched and waited for disaster to strike. People muttered about Harrison's foolishness, predicting his imminent demise. Bets were placed in the saloon about how long he had left. The preacher devoted an entire sermon to the dangers of harboring evil, though he was careful not to mention names. Florence heard the whispers whenever she accompanied Harrison to town for supplies. She saw the way mothers pulled their children close as she passed, the way men crossed the street to avoid her. It hurt, but she had learned to endure hurt. What worried her more was the danger to Harrison, the way his association with her was beginning to affect his standing in the community. "You should send me away," she told him one evening in early September. "People are turning against you because of me." Harrison set down the ledger he had been reviewing. "Is that what you want to leave?" The question caught her off guard. Was it what she wanted? A month ago, the answer would have been clear. She would have left to protect him, to spare him from whatever curse seemed to follow her. But now, the thought of leaving, of never seeing his smile again or hearing his voice, felt like death. "No," she whispered, "but what I want does not matter. I will not let you destroy your life for me." Harrison stood and crossed to where she sat by the fireplace. He knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Florence, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there stole her breath. "I do not care what the town thinks," he said. "I do not care about curses or rumors or anything else. All I care about is you. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You have brought light into a house that has been dark for too long. If you leave, it will not be because I sent you away. It will have to be because you choose to go." Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks. "I am afraid. Every person I have ever cared about has died. I cannot bear it if something happens to you." "Then we will be afraid together," Harrison said. He reached up to brush the tears from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "But we will not let fear rob us of whatever this is between us. Life is too short and too uncertain for that." Florence knew she should be stronger. She should leave to protect him. But she was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of denying herself the one thing she wanted most. So instead of pulling away, she leaned forward and kissed him, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into the press of her lips against his. Harrison responded immediately, his arms coming around her to pull her close. The kiss was tender and desperate all at once, a promise and a plea. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Stay," Harrison whispered against her hair. "Please stay." "Yes," Florence said. "Yes, I will stay." That night marked a turning point. They were more careful about propriety, both aware of how quickly scandal could spread in a small town, but the emotional barriers between them crumbled. Harrison found himself inventing excuses to touch her, to stand close enough to smell the lavender soap she used. Florence caught herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the care in his hands. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, noticed the change immediately when she arrived the following Monday. She was a practical woman in her 50s, widowed and independent, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She watched Harrison and Florence dance around each other in the kitchen, observed the way they unconsciously moved in sync, and shook her head with a smile. "About time," she muttered to herself, loud enough for both of them to hear. Harrison had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mrs. Chen, this is Florence. She is helping with the horses." "Among other things, I see," Mrs. Chen said. She turned to Florence with an appraising look. "You are the one the town is calling cursed." Florence stiffened. "Yes, madam." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen said briskly. "I lived through the gold rush. I have seen enough real evil to know it when I see it, and you are not it. You are just a woman who has had bad luck." She turned back to Harrison. "You have good taste. Your mother would have approved." The casual acceptance was almost more than Florence could bear. She excused herself quickly, fleeing to the stables before the tears could fall. Harrison found her there a few minutes later, crying into the neck of her favorite mare. "Hey," he said softly, entering the stall. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Florence said, wiping at her eyes. "That is the problem. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen, for the curse to manifest, but instead everything is wonderful, and that terrifies me." Harrison put his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Maybe there is no curse. Maybe you have just been unlucky and your luck is finally changing. Or maybe the curse is just waiting," Florence said, "building up to something worse than ever before." "Then we will face it together," Harrison said. He turned her in his arms so she was looking at him. "I mean that, Florence. Whatever comes, we face it together." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of the coming winter. Harrison began preparations for the cold months, stockpiling hay and repairing fences. Florence worked beside him, learning the rhythms of ranch life and finding deep satisfaction in the physical labor. Her body grew stronger, her skin darkening from the sun, her hands developing calluses that spoke of honest work. The town continued to watch them with disapproval, but no disasters occurred. No one died. No accidents befell Harrison or his ranch. Slowly, imperceptibly, the tension began to ease. People still avoided Florence, but the outright hostility faded into wary observation. "They are waiting for me to fail," Harrison said one evening. They were sitting by the fireplace in the main house, a habit that had developed naturally over the weeks. Florence had her own chair now, a comfortable wingback that Harrison had brought down from the attic. "Are you?" Florence asked. "Failing, I mean." Harrison laughed. "The ranch has never been more profitable. The horses are in the best condition they have ever been. My account books are actually balanced for once." He looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "Turns out, letting you into my life was the best business decision I ever made." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am just doing my job." "You are doing much more than that," Harrison said. He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Florence, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me." Her heart began to pound. "All right." "I am in love with you," Harrison said simply. "I have been for weeks now. I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep thinking about you. You have become the center of my world, and I would not have it any other way." Florence felt like she could not breathe. "Harrison, You do not have to say anything right now," he continued. "I know you are scared. I know you think you will bring disaster down on me. But I need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that I want a future with you if you will have me." Tears streamed down Florence's face, but for once they were happy tears. "I love you too. I have tried so hard not to, but I cannot help it. You are everything good in my life." Harrison crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. They held each other for a long time, neither speaking, both savoring the moment. When Harrison finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know you have reasons to be hesitant, but marry me anyway. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are not cursed, that you are blessed." Florence's first instinct was to say no, to protect him from the fate that had befallen her previous husbands. But as she looked into his face, saw the love and hope shining there, she realized that saying no would not protect him. It would only guarantee that they both lived half lives, always wondering what might have been. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Harrison let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. Florence kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into the embrace. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. The only guests were Mrs. Chen and a few of Harrison's ranch hands who had come to respect Florence during her time there. The preacher from town refused to perform the ceremony, so they had to bring in a minister from Carson City, a jovial man who did not care about rumors and curses. Florence wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, her dark hair woven with wildflowers that Harrison had picked that morning. Harrison wore his best suit, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tenderness that Florence felt her last defenses crumble completely. The town, predictably, was scandalized. Bets on Harrison's death increased. The more superstitious residents began avoiding his ranch entirely, convinced that disaster was imminent. But as November turned to December and nothing catastrophic occurred, the certainty began to waver. Florence moved her belongings into the main house, into Harrison's bedroom, and discovered what it meant to share a life with someone who truly loved her. Harrison was patient and gentle, always asking what she needed, what she wanted. He made her laugh with silly jokes at breakfast and held her close at night when nightmares about past losses woke her in a panic. "I am here," he would whisper. "I am not going anywhere." Florence learned to believe him, one day at a time. Their physical relationship deepened slowly, both of them nervous for different reasons. Harrison wanted to erase the memories of Florence's previous marriages, which had been born of desperation rather than desire. Florence wanted to prove that she could be a real wife to him, not just another burden to bear. The first time they truly came together as husband and wife, it was snowing outside, fat flakes drifting past the windows to blanket the world in white. Harrison built up the fire until the bedroom was warm and golden, then undressed Florence slowly, reverently, telling her she was beautiful until she almost believed it. He was gentle and patient, reading her responses, adjusting his touch to match what brought her pleasure rather than his own. When it was over, Florence lay in his arms and cried, overwhelmed by the realization that intimacy did not have to be something to endure. It could be a gift freely given and joyfully received. "Are you all right?" Harrison asked, concern in his voice. "I am better than all right," Florence said, laughing through her tears. "I am happy, truly, genuinely happy." Harrison pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Good, that is all I have ever wanted." As winter deepened, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Florence took over much of the household management, working alongside Mrs. Chen to keep the house running smoothly. She continued to help with the horses, finding joy in the work and satisfaction in seeing them thrive under her care. Harrison taught her the business side of ranching, showing her the account books and explaining his strategies. He valued her input, often implementing her suggestions and crediting her when they worked out well. They were partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was stronger than what either could have created alone. Christmas came, and Harrison surprised Florence with a beautiful silver locket containing a photograph of the two of them that a traveling photographer had taken in town. Florence gave him a hand-tooled leather journal she had been secretly working on for weeks, embossed with his initials. They exchanged their gifts by the fireplace, then made love slowly and thoroughly, savoring every touch and kiss. "This is the best Christmas of my life," Harrison said afterward, holding her close. Florence smiled against his chest. "Mine too, the very best." The new year of 1873 brought bitter cold and heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Harrison and Florence were content to be snowed in together, finding endless ways to occupy their time. They read books aloud by the fire, played cards and chess, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. It was during one of these long conversations that Florence finally opened up about her first marriage, about being 17 and terrified and marrying a man she barely knew because she had nowhere else to go. He was not cruel, she said, but he was not kind either. He married me because he needed someone to cook and clean, not because he cared about me. When he died in that mining accident, I was sad, but I was also relieved. And then I felt guilty for being relieved, and the guilt made it worse. Harrison listened without judgment, holding her hand. You were just a child trying to survive. There is no shame in that. The second marriage was similar, Florence continued. He was older, established. He promised security. But he drank too much and yelled too loud, and when he got sick, part of me was glad. And then he died, and people started whispering about a curse, and I got scared. What about the third? Harrison asked gently. Florence was quiet for a long time. The third was the worst, because I married him hoping the cursed talk would stop if I just tried again. But he was violent when he drank, and I spent 6 months walking on eggshells, trying not to provoke him. When he got thrown from that horse when he died, I felt nothing but relief. And that is when I knew I could not keep doing this. I could not keep marrying for survival. So I ran. You ran to me, Harrison said. I ran to Genoa, Florence corrected. You were just foolish enough to help, Harrison smiled. Best foolish decision I ever made. He cupped her face in his hands. Florence, you are not cursed. You were trapped in situations that no one should have to endure, and you survived. That does not make you cursed. It makes you strong. I do not feel strong, she admitted. You are the strongest person I know, Harrison said firmly. You have survived things that would have broken most people, and you are still here, still capable of love and joy. That is strength. Florence kissed him then, pouring her gratitude and love into the gesture. Harrison responded in kind, and they ended up making love right there on the rug in front of the fireplace. The world outside frozen and quiet while they generated their own heat. When spring finally arrived in March, melting the snow and turning the world green again, the town of Genoa had to face an uncomfortable truth. Harrison Gregory was not only alive and well, but his ranch was thriving. Florence was not only still there, but she was clearly healthy and happy. The predicted disaster had not materialized. The first person to soften was, surprisingly, the store owner Samuel. His daughter had been ill with a fever that had broken only after Mrs. Chen brought over a special tea that Florence had prepared. Samuel came to the ranch one evening in late March, hat in hand, looking deeply uncomfortable. I came to thank you, he said to Florence, for the medicine that helped my daughter. Florence was hanging laundry on the line, and she paused in surprise. Mrs. Chen deserves the credit. She is the one who knows about healing herbs. She said it was your recipe, Samuel persisted, that you learned it from your mother before she passed. Florence set down the sheet she had been hanging. How is your daughter? Better. Much better, thanks to you. Samuel shifted his weight from foot to foot. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Gregory. I judged you unfairly. I let fear and superstition cloud my thinking. You were protecting your town, Florence said quietly. I understand that. Still, I was wrong, Samuel said. I can see that now. You are not cursed. You are just a woman who has had hard luck. I am sorry for my part in making it harder. Florence felt tears prick her eyes. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words until they were spoken. Thank you. That means more than you know. Samuel left shortly after, but his visit marked a change. Over the following weeks, other townspeople began to thaw. They nodded to Florence when she came to town. They stopped crossing the street to avoid her. A few even offered tentative smiles. Harrison watched the transformation with satisfaction. "I told you," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You are not cursed. The town just needed time to see what I saw from the beginning." "And what is that?" Florence asked, though she was smiling. "That you are extraordinary," Harrison said simply. He pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "The answer to my prayers, even though I did not know I was praying." Florence rested her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I was so lost when I came here. I truly believed I was cursed, that I would never have a normal life." "And now?" Harrison asked. "Now I know I was just waiting," Florence said. "Waiting to find the place where I belonged, waiting to find you." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the sounds of the ranch settling around them. Cattle lowed in the distance. Horses nickered softly in the stables. An owl hooted from the trees. It was home in a way nowhere else had ever been, and Florence sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the miracle of it all. In May, Florence realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had been afraid to hope, afraid to believe that this too might work out after so much had gone wrong in her past. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Harrison, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Florence laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the reality of it. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Harrison set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." They told Mrs. Chen, who immediately began making plans and offering advice. They told the ranch hands, who congratulated them heartily. Slowly, word spread through Genoa, and the transformation in how the town viewed Florence became complete. A pregnant woman could not be cursed. A thriving ranch with a baby on the way was a sign of blessing, not disaster. Women who had previously shunned Florence began to visit, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. They shared their own pregnancy stories, creating a community that Florence had never experienced before. She found herself laughing with other women over tea, discussing names and nursery arrangements and all the mundane details that made up a life. "I never thought I would have this," she told Harrison one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the small swell of her stomach. "Friends, community, a real home. You deserve all of it and more," Harrison said. He kissed her gently. "You deserve every happiness." The pregnancy was not easy. Florence suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. Her back ached. Her feet swelled. She cried at the smallest things, then laughed at herself for crying. Through it all, Harrison was patient and attentive, rubbing her feet, holding her hair when she was sick, and reassuring her that she was beautiful even when she felt like a whale. "I cannot imagine loving you more than I do right now," he told her one evening in July, when she was complaining about how huge she felt. "But somehow I think I will when I see you holding our baby." Florence looked at him, this man who had taken a chance on a cursed woman and shown her what love really meant, and felt her heart overflow. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Then we are even," Harrison said, pulling her into his arms as carefully as if she were made of spun glass. "Because you terrify me in the best possible way." Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1874, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Harrison paced the house like a caged animal, refusing to go more than a few feet from the bedroom door. Mrs. Chen and the midwife she had brought from town handled the delivery with calm efficiency, while Florence alternated between screaming and apologizing for screaming. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Harrison was allowed into the room. He took one look at Florence, exhausted and beautiful with their son in her arms, and started crying. "He is perfect," Florence said, her voice rough from the labor. "Look, Harrison. He is perfect." Harrison sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny face of his son with wonder. What should we name him? They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but had never quite settled on anything. Now, looking at the baby, Florence knew exactly what felt right. "Henry," she said, "after your father." Harrison looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Florence said. "Your father built this ranch. He made a life for you here. It feels right to honor that." So Henry Gregory he became, and if the baby cried more than seemed strictly necessary and refused to sleep for more than 2 hours at a time, neither of his parents cared. They were besotted, both of them, taking turns walking the floor with him and changing his diapers and marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. The town of Genoa welcomed the baby with a warmth that Florence had never expected. People brought gifts and food. They offered to help with chores so Florence could rest. They cooed over Henry when Harrison brought him to town, declaring him the finest baby in all of Nevada. "You have given them a gift," Mrs. Chen said one afternoon, watching Florence nurse Henry by the fire. "You have reminded them that redemption is possible, that people can change and grow." "I did not do anything," Florence protested. "You survived," Mrs. Chen said simply. "And you loved well. That is more than most people manage." As Henry grew from a baby into a toddler, Florence and Harrison fell even deeper in love. They had weathered pregnancy and childbirth and sleepless nights together, and each challenge had strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. They still found time for each other, for quiet conversations and passionate embraces, even as their lives revolved around their son. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, building toys for Henry and teaching him about the ranch. Florence was gentle and firm, setting boundaries while encouraging exploration. Together they created a home filled with laughter and love, the kind of home Florence had dreamed of but never believed she would have. When Henry was 2, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was easier this time, her body knowing what to expect. She carried a daughter who was born in the spring of 1876, with her father's green eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Clara, after Harrison's mother, and if possible fell even more in love with their growing family. The ranch continued to prosper. Harrison expanded the operation, buying more land and increasing the size of his herds. Florence took on more responsibility, managing the household accounts and handling correspondence with buyers. They were partners in every sense, building an empire together. Genoa, meanwhile, had completely forgotten about the curse that supposedly followed Florence. She was now Mrs. Gregory, respected rancher's wife and devoted mother. She was invited to ladies' socials and church gatherings. She was asked for advice on everything from cooking to child-rearing. She had become, against all odds, a pillar of the community. On their 5th wedding anniversary in November of 1878, Harrison took Florence on a picnic to a beautiful spot overlooking the valley. The children were with Mrs. Chen, giving them a rare afternoon alone. They spread a blanket under a massive oak tree and ate cheese and bread and apples while watching clouds drift across the sky. "You remember what you said that first day?" Harrison asked, lying on his back with his head in Florence's lap. "About being cursed." Florence laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "I remember being terrified and desperate and convinced that helping me would be the death of you. Instead it was the making of me," Harrison said. He reached up to cup her face. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Florence Gregory. These 5 years have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Florence said softly. "I never believed I could have this. A real marriage, a family, a home. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Harrison corrected. He sat up and pulled a small box from his pocket. "I got you something." Florence opened the box to find a beautiful gold bracelet engraved with their wedding date and the names of their children. She slipped it onto her wrist, blinking back tears. "It is perfect," she said. "Thank you." They made love there under the oak tree, the autumn sun warm on their skin and the world stretching endlessly around them. It was passionate and tender, a celebration of everything they had built together. Afterward, they lay entwined, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want more children," Harrison said. "A whole houseful if you are willing." Florence smiled. "I think I could be persuaded." "I want to keep expanding the ranch," Harrison continued. "Leave something substantial for Henry and Clara and whoever else comes along." "I want to keep loving you," Florence said simply. "Every day with everything I have. That is what I want most." Harrison kissed her deeply. "That is a goal I can support." They returned home as the sun was setting, to find their children playing in the yard under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. Henry ran to meet them, chattering about the fort he had built, while Clara toddled after him on unsteady legs. Florence scooped them both up, one in each arm, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was what the town had once called cursed. This abundance of love and life and joy. The thought almost made her laugh. She had been called cursed, damned, dangerous. But Harrison had called her something else entirely. He had called her the answer to his prayers. And in doing so, he had made her believe it too. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Florence had 2 more children, twin boys born in 1880, bringing their family to 4 children. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Henry learned to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around and absorbing everything about ranching. Clara proved to have her mother's gift with horses, gentling even the most stubborn animals with patience and kindness. The town of Genoa grew too, adding new businesses and residents. Florence became friends with many of the women who had once shunned her, though she never quite forgot those early days of rejection. The memory kept her humble and made her quick to welcome newcomers, remembering what it felt like to be an outsider. Harrison remained her rock, her partner, her greatest love. Even after years of marriage, he still found ways to surprise her, to show her that his love was not fading but deepening. He brought her wildflowers for no reason. He insisted she take time for herself when the children became overwhelming. He told her she was beautiful even when she felt tired and worn. In the spring of 1885, as Florence approached her 40th birthday, she and Harrison took a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen and trusted ranch hands. They traveled to San Francisco, staying in a fine hotel and eating in restaurants and walking along the waterfront like young lovers. "You ever regret it?" Florence asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "Taking me in, marrying me, tying yourself to someone with such a terrible reputation." Harrison looked at her as if she had asked the stupidest question in the world. "Regret you? Florence, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. The only thing I regret is that I did not find you sooner." "The town called me cursed," Florence said softly. "And I called you the answer to my prayers," Harrison replied. He pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "I was right. They were wrong. End of story." Florence laughed and kissed him, tasting salt air and promise. "I love you more than I have words to express." "Then spend the rest of your life showing me," Harrison said. "I certainly plan to spend mine showing you." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to tackle whatever came next. The children were growing fast. Henry now a young man of 11 who was taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Clara was 8, still devoted to the horses and dreaming of having her own stable someday. The twins were 5, wild and rambunctious, and constantly getting into mischief. Life was full and chaotic and wonderful. There were challenges, of course, harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But through it all, Florence and Harrison faced everything together, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. On a warm evening in June of 1890, the Gregory family gathered on the porch of the ranch house for supper. It had become a tradition over the years, eating outside when the weather allowed, watching the sun set over the land they all loved. Florence looked around at her family, at Harrison still handsome at 43, at her children healthy and happy and full of life, and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, noticing her expression. "Just how far we have come," Florence said. "I was remembering that first day, riding into Genoa, convinced I was cursed and that my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning," Harrison said. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that still sent shivers down her spine after all these years. Henry, now 16 and already taller than his father, shook his head. "I cannot imagine you ever thinking you were cursed, Ma. You are the least cursed person I know." "That is because you did not know her before she met Pa," Clara said with the wisdom of her 13 years. "Mrs. Chen told me all about it. People were terrible to you." "Some people were," Florence acknowledged, "but your father was not. He saw past the rumors and the fear and gave me a chance. That changed everything." The twins, now 10 and already showing signs of being even taller than their older brother, exchanged glances. "So Pa saved you?" one of them asked. "More like we saved each other," Harrison said, squeezing Florence's hand. "I was lonely before your mother came along. Going through the motions of life but not really living. She gave me purpose and joy and a reason to look forward to tomorrow." Florence felt tears well up, even after all these years, moved by his words. "The town called me cursed, but you called me something else. What was it you said?" "The answer to your prayers, still true," Harrison said. "Every single day." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Gregory family sat together in comfortable silence. They did not know it yet, but this moment, this perfect evening, would become one of those memories they would all carry forever. The kind of memory that proved beyond any doubt that curses were just stories, and that love, real love, could transform even the darkest past into the brightest future. Years continued to unfold in their predictable yet precious way. Henry took over more of the ranch operations as Harrison began to think about succession. Clara married a good man from town, a veterinarian who shared her love of animals. They built a house on Gregory land and started a family of their own. The twins went off to college back east, the first in the family to do so, though they both promised to return and help run the ranch eventually. Through it all, Florence and Harrison remained devoted to each other. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a bit slower. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1903, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Grandchildren ran wild through the house and yard while Florence and Harrison held court on the porch, accepting congratulations and gifts. The town of Genoa, represented by nearly every resident, had contributed to a new barn in their honor, acknowledging the contributions the Gregorys had made to the community over the decades. 30 years, Florence marveled, sitting next to Harrison and watching the party unfold around them. "It feels like both forever and no time at all. 30 years of being married to my best friend," Harrison said. His hair was white now, his face lined with age, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had the day he had offered her a place to stay. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even knowing how much trouble I would be," Florence teased. "Especially knowing that," Harrison said. He raised his glass of lemonade in a toast. "To 30 more years." "To 30 more," Florence echoed, clinking her glass against his. "They did not get 30 more years." Harrison died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1908, at the age of 61. Florence woke one morning to find him cold beside her, a slight smile on his face as if he had been having a pleasant dream. The grief nearly destroyed her, but she held on, remembering his words from so long ago about facing things together. The funeral was the largest Genoa had ever seen. People came from all over Nevada to pay their respects to a man who had been respected, admired, and loved. Florence stood dry-eyed through the service, her children around her, drawing strength from the family she and Harrison had built together. After the funeral, as people were leaving, the oldest resident of Genoa approached Florence. He was ancient, well into his 90s, and could barely walk even with a cane, but he made his way to her side with determination. "I remember when you first came to town," he said, his voice wavering but clear. "I was one of the ones who said you were cursed. I was wrong. I spent the rest of my life watching you and Harrison prove just how wrong. You were not cursed, Mrs. Gregory. You were blessed, and you were a blessing to all of us." Florence finally let herself cry then, the tears she had been holding back flowing freely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying that." She lived another 15 years after Harrison's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She remained active in the ranch's operations until the very end, still able to gentle a nervous horse with just her voice and touch. People in Genoa spoke of her with reverence, the woman who had overcome tragedy and superstition to build something lasting and good. When Florence died in her sleep in the spring of 1923, at the age of 77, the town mourned her as deeply as they had mourned Harrison. She was buried next to him, under the oak tree where they had celebrated their 5th anniversary so many years before. Her headstone bore her name, her dates, and a simple inscription chosen by her children. "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, the answer to his prayers." But perhaps the truest memorial was the ranch itself, still thriving under the management of her descendants. The Gregory Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Nevada, known for its quality livestock and fair treatment of workers. It stood as a testament to what two people could build when they believed in each other, when they chose love over fear. And if sometimes, on warm summer evenings, ranch hands claimed to see two figures sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset together, well, no one really questioned it. After all, love like that did not just disappear. It echoed through generations, a reminder that the greatest curse of all is a life lived without taking chances on hope. The story of Florence and Harrison became legend in Genoa, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren told their children about the woman the town had called cursed, and the rancher who had seen the truth. They told how love had transformed fear into faith, how partnership had built an empire, how choosing kindness over judgment had changed not just two lives but an entire community. In the end, Florence Katherine had been right about one thing all those years ago. She had been cursed, but not in the way she thought. She had been cursed with terrible luck and tragic losses that left her vulnerable and alone. But the curse had been broken the moment Harrison Gregory had looked at her with compassion instead of condemnation, had offered help instead of judgment, had seen possibility instead of danger. He had called her the answer to his prayers, and in doing so, had answered hers. Together, they had proven that the past does not have to define the future, that love can overcome even the darkest reputation, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as curses, riding into town on a tired mare with nothing but hope to sustain them. The ranch still stands today, a sprawling operation run by the sixth generation of Gregorys, and if you visit Genoa, Nevada, and ask about the history of the place, someone will inevitably tell you the story. They will tell you about the woman called cursed and the man who called her blessed. They will tell you about a love that defied expectations and built something lasting. They will tell you that sometimes, just sometimes, happily ever after is not just a fairy tale. Sometimes it is just the truth.